Hello there, my name is Kevin J. Patel. Thank you guys so much for inviting me to speak on behalf of the important issues that are happening around the world. And thank you to the Korea Youth Expo and all the young people who are participating in this expo to learn about these issues that are happening around the world and what to do about them. I look forward to giving my talk and learning more and to see what you guys do in the future. Hey everyone, my name is Kevin J. Patel. I'm the executive director and founder of OneUpAction International, an organization that works with marginalized young people and young people in general across the world to get them the resources to take climate action. And it's so good to to be speaking to you guys about these important issues that are happening right now.
The topic of this event is New 100 Years, Now Youth Leads. You have spoken out on social issues as a young leader. Why did you start this activity?
Why did I start my activism in general? The conference title is called A New 100 Years, New Youth Leaders. And I think one of the things is that we're not the leaders of tomorrow, we're the leaders of today. 9 years ago, and it's almost been a decade, I saw the inequalities and injustices that were happening in my community, and I wanted to do something about them. That's the reason why said enough is enough. I needed to stand up. Who will, in my community if it wasn't me? And I did, and I made sure that not just I was standing up for the rights of my community members, but I was making sure that other community members were standing up, and so that we can really combat these crises.
How important do you think it is for youth to have their own opinions and speak out with their voice on social issues?
I believe it's so important that young people speak out against injustices and inequalities and things that they don't sit, things that they think they need to change. I think it's so important that young people have their own opinions on what happens, not only in their community, but around their nation, around the world. Making sure that young people can band together and stand in solidarity and say, enough is enough. We're going to be inheriting this world. If we're not protecting it for the next 7 generations or even our generation, then we're not going to have a livable future. We're not going to have a planet to live on. So we have to make sure that young people are standing in solidarity with one another, that young people are fighting against the injustices and inequalities that are happening to our communities, and making sure that we fight for what we know is right, and having our own opinions on those injustices and inequalities so that we're able to fight against them.
What mindset do you think youth should have in order to become the youth that are leading the new 100 years?
The type of mindset that we need for, young people who are leading the next 100 years is a type of mindset of being optimistic. I think there's so many pessimistic and so many bad things happening around the world that we tend to lose our focus on the good things that are happening, the small achievements that we've made as young people, how we have marched all together, how we've done big celebrations and big marches and protests against these injustices and inequalities. And even when I was talking about celebrations, we've had a lot of things that we've had happen good to us. So definitely, it's something about making sure that we're combining the celebrations, we're combining the stuff that is bad, but also making sure that we're an optimistic view, that we're fighting for something so that we have a livable future, right? When we have something that we can look forward to, and making sure that young people are not just the leaders of tomorrow, we're the leaders of today, and we make sure that we're able to fight for that.
Lastly, what is your dream that you want to achieve in the future?
The dream that I want to achieve in the future is making sure that we have a livable future, is making sure that the next 7 generations, don't have to worry about becoming an activist and fighting against the injustices, the systems of oppression, or nor even the inequalities that are happening in their communities or throughout this, throughout the globe. And so I definitely think one of my dreams is making sure that you and I can stand in solidarity so that we're able to have a future, and making sure that the next 7 generations have a future as well.
What country do you think is most responsive to the climate crisis?
I think every country is responsible for the place that we are in right now. I think not one nor one country is responsive enough to this global crisis that is happening. And so I think every country needs to step it up and making sure that we are not only reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, but we are acting upon the climate crisis, not only protecting the planet, but protecting the people on it.
What do you think is a habit of ruining the climate that can't easily be changed?
I think one habit that can't be easily changed that is harming the planet a lot is the need for money. I think one of the things that we kind of tend to forget is that a lot of the reasons that, the problems that we're in right now are caused by greed because people want short-term, wealth instead of long-term prosperity for the people who are living on this planet. So that's the reason why people are doing these type of destructive things to our planet and making sure that, they're getting this short-term profit and not actually benefiting the people or the planet. So I think one of the things is the fossil fuel industry is the most destructive. Throughout this nation, I think a lot of people are, and throughout the world, a lot of people are hesitant to, come off of the fossil fuel industry. But I think that is one of the bad habits that we have that is going to take a long time to get out of, get off of. And hopefully we get rid of the fossil fuel industry altogether and we divest from it. I think that's one of the bad habits that we have right now.
What would you do if an advertising offer came from a company that would speed up the climate crisis?
If I were to get a advertising offer from a huge company that is speeding up the process of the climate crisis, I would not take it. I will urge all the other activists with me to not take that offer. And never have I ever worked with companies or organizations that speed up the process of the climate crisis. I am always hesitant to work with these huge corporations and organizations that are causing and perpetrating these injustices and inequalities and even this climate crisis. So I definitely encourage all of you, if you get an offer from these organizations and corporations that are speeding up the climate crisis, to not take them. So making sure that we're fighting against these companies so that they can divest from whatever fossil fuel industry that they're invested in, and making sure that they're going to a safer route and not causing the climate crisis.
Do you have any interests or hobbies other than climate issues?
I definitely have other hobbies and interests besides the climate crisis and or fighting and advocating on behalf of the climate. I am a huge runner. I love running. I don't do it as much because of the global pandemic, but I also am a huge, I love photography, so I definitely do a lot of photography when I can. Thank you so much to the Korea Youth Expo and all the young attendees that are attending this amazing conference that is highlighting the important issues that are happening around the world, not only on climate, but social justice issues as well. And so thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of these important issues. I'm not a member or of the Korea Youth Expo, but I definitely am rooting for all of the young leaders that are there and that are advocating on behalf of the climate and are doing amazing work around social justice issues and inequalities and injustices. So keep up the fight. I will like to start my speech and my lecture about the importance of youth activism. I started 9 years ago, so it's almost been a decade. So my speech is personal to me. And I really wanted you guys to take a look at where I came from as a young person, where I'm leading, and really encourage you guys to keep going and keep fighting for a better future. Many of you guys have maybe learned about the climate crisis from a biology teacher, a science teacher, or have you seen a video of Greta Thunberg or Bill Nye, or have you read an article or read a book about it, or even a TED Talk? For many of you, that was the way you guys came about learning about the climate crisis. That's completely normal. It's how a lot of people have learned about this climate crisis and how about the global warming that's happening to this planet. But it's definitely not the only way. For people like me, the climate crisis isn't something that came into my life or everyone else's life that is going through the same thing through social media or through school or through ways of learning about it through a book. It's an everyday reality. I have to live with it. When I was 11 years old, I was directly impacted by the climate crisis. I didn't know it at the time, but that one moment changed my life as I know it today. It all started with me coming to school late, and because I wanted to go grab breakfast, I was sitting in my sixth grade English classroom when my chest pains started coming. My heart was beating very, very fast, and it was so hard to breathe. So I told a teacher. At first, he didn't want to believe me because I came to class late, obviously. Um, I didn't want to make a great deal out of it because I thought it was going to go away. And let me tell you, I was wrong. It was wrong for saying it was going to go away because it didn't. When my first class was over, I headed to my second class where I noticed it was still going on. So I told my second period teacher, who's my second class, that my chest was hurting. So he sent me right away to the nurse's office. And the nurse immediately freaked out and dropped every single thing and started calling the paramedics to come to the school and, rush me away. And that's when I knew, it hit me, that something was very wrong. And my life at that moment changed forever. I thought it was nothing, but then that I was just fine and I was overreacting, but everyone else was freaking out. How the nurse called the paramedics and how I was rushed to the hospital. And that day I was surrounded by medical experts who didn't know what was going on with me. And why a kid like me who was healthy and playing sports and was running and doing all these other extra activities can all of a sudden have heart palpitations that goes up from 200 to 300 beats per minute. Doctors then diagnosed me with irregular heartbeat and heart palpitations without knowing where it was stemming from. So I started looking for reasons why this might happen to me. And one answer I kept coming back to was the place I lived in, South Central Los Angeles. My neighborhood is classified as a sacrifice zone, a place where residents, often low income and people of color, live close to freeways, factories, and oil wells, and where many inequalities are present. I then realized that it wasn't just about me, the people and the place that I love that was being affected as well by these issues, by these inequalities and injustices. The community that I grew up with, Los Angeles, isn't just ravaged by all these other inequalities of food inequalities, food injustice that's happening, but it was attacked and ravaged with air and smog pollution and environmental racism and not enough resources going into my community. And with my community being a food desert, that's just adding on top of the list of inequalities and injustices that are happening. Something that I was already teaching my peers before I was affected by the heart palpitations. I didn't associate with me being an activist because it was something that my community was going through, and I wanted to teach them about that issue. Even though my community was being affected by these issues, by these inequalities and injustices, I was teaching them about them without even associating me being an activist. Knowing that it wasn't just me and it was my community being affected by these underlying health issues such as asthma, heart palpitations, cancer, irregular heartbeat, and so much more, just stemming from air and smog pollution. It was from the inequalities and systems that perpetrated those inequalities. It was the systems of oppressions. That sparked something in me that said enough is enough. And now it has been 9 years since I first learned of the inequalities and injustices that are happening in my community. And I have been advocating not only against those inequalities and injustices, but I've been advocating for more voices, more diverse voices to be in this movement, because we're right now at the forefront and at the front lines of being affected by the climate crisis and seeing how these issues are literally impacting our communities. Now more than ever, there is a sense of urgency with the climate crisis, and there's good reason why. Communities around the world are already being affected by this crisis, and we must all act and fight not only for a livable future, but for a regenerative future, a sustainable future where we aren't just protecting the planet, but we are protecting the people who live on it. I've been fighting for almost a decade, but there is now only a decade left to solve this detrimental crisis. To reverse the effects of the climate crisis, get out there and start working, organizing with your young people. When we're looking at the climate crisis, we're not only looking at how the warming of the planet is affecting, global warming. We're looking at how BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, the Global South, MAPA peoples are being affected right now. We love to separate the issues of climate justice and social justice, but that is just wrong. These issues are intersectional and are interconnected because they are perpetrated by the same systems that cause these problems. And again, that being the systems of oppression. To name a few: racism, discrimination, capitalism, colonialism, sexism, but the list goes on. That is why the role of the climate justice movement isn't just about advocating for climate, but for the people who are being most affected by these injustices and inequalities. Justice is about having equity and equality. Today's young generation and future generations will experience more profound impacts of the climate change as it worsens over time, from direct adverse health impacts to financial implications of needing to shore up infrastructure and other adaptation and mitigation needs. That is why it is important that older generations and younger generations start acting alongside each other so that we can demand justice for not only the people who are being affected right now, but demand justice for the people who are going to be impacted in the future. Recently, here in the United States, we saw how young people really changed and made a difference. To say enough is enough. We need action on the important issues that are happening here in the United States, but not only in the United States, around the world. We banded together and said enough is enough. We didn't like a leader and we got him out. And now we have a leader that will fight for justice and will fight for people. This wasn't just a win for climate or the climate movement, but for all movements that are demanding justice. When we talk about justice, it's not just about equality or inequality. It's talking about how we have to fight for people who are being affected the most by these crises. So it's talking about equality and equity, not inequalities. It's talking about making sure that we have justice in the sense of equality and equity. But the work doesn't stop just because we got someone that is going to fight for climate or believes in the science. We as activists need to keep fighting because climate justice means fighting for racial justice, for social justice, for gender justice, for people's rights across the world. And we cannot sit back and say we've done enough until these problems and the people affected by them are resolved and get justice. And so I just want to say thank you again for inviting me to speak on behalf of these issues. I'm coming to you from the United States. And, one thing I always say is even though that we have someone who believes in the science and who's going to act on the climate crisis, we can never stop our activism, nor should we stop fighting for what is right until we make sure that we get justice. And true justice looks like equality and equity, and making sure that we are fighting until we get justice for every community that is being affected by these issues. So again, I want to thank the Korea Youth Expo for inviting me to speak. And I want to thank all the young people who are here that are advocating not only on the climate crisis, but all these other social justice issues and racial issues, gender issues, you name it. It is so inspiring to see all of you guys halfway across the world doing this important work and making sure that you guys are standing in solidarity with other activists and learning about the different issues and how you can make a difference. So thank you again for inviting me. It's such an honor. Korea Youth Expo 2020, keep fighting.